the life photographer brought real class to the business, and obviously was his own man or woman, because so many of them were the best. Margaret Burke White, of course. But clearly they had a mandate from Life magazine that they were the bosses, that they were shooting the story, that the reporter was going to come along later and fill in whatever was necessary in cut lines, but as far as the story goes, it was theirs. And they showed this attitude from the beginning, real arrogance, if you please, that they were something special and something different.
You think in the early days of everybody, all the newspaper photographers, I don't want to downgrade because we hired an awful lot of newspaper photographers. They just moved down to a different camera size, and they got more imaginative. But they all line up in a little semicircle and shoot what's going on, shoot right at it. Life photographers shot what they weren't. They went around behind the guy.
When Roosevelt died, Wilson Hicks called me and said, get to Warm Springs any way you can. This was in the afternoon. I decided to get in my car and just drive, and I drove all night and got to Warm Springs early the next morning. And when the caisson came by with the casket on it, the Secret Service lined all the photographers up. There must have been, I don't know, 50, 75 photographers. Just, they protected the president as though he was alive. That's the way they think. I was standing there jostling for a place, and I heard an accordion playing behind me, and I looked around and I saw Graham Jackson, this petty officer of the Navy, and here he was playing with tears rolling down his cheeks. And I thought, my God, what a picture. And I turned around, I had a Leica, it was a very quiet camera, and just made 3 or 4 shots because I didn't want to attract the attention of the other photographers of what I was doing, because they watch Life photographers. And none of them paid any attention, and that's how that picture came about.
Well, now, this is a sample of the way we had to photograph in Washington. Because of the dailies, and we were a weekly, we had to get something different. Now, at the time this was taken, someone was being thrown off the stand for not being polite to the senators. And I remember the writer screaming at me, come back, they're throwing him out. And I thought, no, here's my picture. And they were reacting and trying to see, because they had put these big stars all the way in the back.
When I lecture sometimes to college students, I pose them a question. I said, suppose you had one exposure left, and you were sent on an assignment where a man had been murdered by his wife. And she was on one side of the room crying, and he was lying covered with a sheet with the blood on the other side of the room. Which shot would you take? And a lot of them will say, oh, of course I'd take the murdered man. But I know that I would have turned my camera off that one last exposure on the grieving woman standing in the corner. That photograph meant more to me.
With the civil rights movement, hadn't started yet. And I was given a story to photograph a singer named Billy Eckstine. And they said, photograph the sound of his voice. Well, he happens to have a sensuous, deep voice. And I think I did that. But I also got a photograph of a fan's. I was very thrilled, and I showed it to one of the editors, and they were very troubled. And then I heard from Mr. Luce 2 words, run it.
The effect that Life and its coverage had on the American public was one of making controversy acceptable. A willingness to show both sides. A willingness to, I think it had a freeing effect on society and on publishing in general. Controversial, yes, but lively.
It had a profound effect on what people thought, and it turned them, and I think it was the greatest contribution to the end of, or as much of an end of segregation as we've accomplished. It was greatly due to Life magazine.
Well, can you tell us, Mr. Luce, Life's actual philosophy?
Well, if I should put that in a word, I'd say that my associates and I believe in one thing. We believe that human life has a purpose, and our job is to show individual people and nations working out that purpose in freedom and for justice for all.
George Scadding covered a story in Baltimore, Maryland, one of the first days of school integration. The local minister, two of the school teachers, had volunteered to drive home from school some black students who were petrified by what they had experienced that day. And when you look at the expression on the faces of the white people standing on the sidewalk, you know why they were petrified and in fear of their life.
This is a story on the black school in West Memphis, Arkansas. It came to the attention of Life magazine because of a crusading newspaper publisher who was outraged because the school system had built more classrooms than were needed for white children, equipped them with typewriters, they had gleaming water fountains, and the black children all went to school in a Negro church, black church, with a potbelly stove, no running water, no bathroom. This mob of children all in one room, one teacher. The picture ran in Life showing the disparity in the situation, and it caused a black school to get built. Being a Southerner, they expected me to understand and to show it in a nice light, or whatever they considered a fair light. They didn't consider what Life did a fair thing at all. They referred to Life often as that communist paper, magazine, liberal, nigger-loving magazine. You still work for that nigger-loving magazine? Yeah, I still work for that nigger-loving magazine. I sure do.
I think Life's coverage of the civil rights movement, which was very, very extensive, is based on two things. One, of course, it was a tremendous news story. The whole civil rights movement was news. Life was a news magazine, so of course we covered it. But I think beyond that, there was a real conviction on the part of the editors that this was a just movement. And I think that did indeed influence not so much the kind of pictures we took, but the space and the play we gave to photographs.
I don't think that simply words could ever have aroused the emotions of the American people as much as seeing the confrontation of the police and the militia of whatever form, sheriffs, and the blacks, as they attempted to assert what were simply the minimum human rights for a dignified man. No, that consciousness, I don't think, could ever have come to the American people, probably without pictures.
The camera itself did not give me any particular courage to go into places that sort. It was, I felt the need for me to somehow or another use humanity to get people to become aware of how people suffered. That was what drove me into it. Not to get a beautiful picture, or not to get a great picture, or anything of that sort. There was always the need possibly to befriend an impoverished family, or to help a poor boy, a poor girl, to expose something to the public that I felt was being hidden. As long as the camera was on the right side, I felt that I should be there working away with it. I was sent to Brazil to do a story on poverty in general. So I found this little boy who was struggling up the hill with a 5-gallon bucket of water on his head. I was sitting underneath a jacamendo tree or something of the sort, and he smiled at me. I smiled back at him. He was a beautiful little kid, but death was all over him. I could see he was dying. And he told me himself that he was dying. He didn't really care. He really wanted his brothers and sisters to be taken care of some way, someday. I did the story on Flavio. I stayed there 3 months with him, lived up in the shacks with him on top of the mountain. And when the story was published, the last line in the diary said something to the effect that Flavio told me goodbye today, and he asked me if I was coming back to the favela to see him. And I lied and said yes, because I would never go back there. I'd never seen such poverty in my life. And in came thousands and thousands and thousands of letters. In came, in less than 3 weeks, over $30,000. And Life magazine says, you got to go back and get that kid. And there was a Jewish clinic in Denver, Colorado, said if I brought him to them, they would save his life. The doctors in Rio said, this kid won't live another 6 months. I said, I'm going to take that chance. And what happened was that Flavio lived. Not only that, when I went back just a few years ago, I was in Rio, and I said, my friend Flavio, he's always writing me letters, even till today. And I went to see him, and by this time, Flavio had his own house, had 3 lovely little children, and just named one after me. I never direct people at all. I hung around and waited for a week before I used my camera, simply to convince them that I was a friend of theirs, and I wanted to help them so much. So eventually, one of the kids says, when are you going to bring your camera? I said, one of these days. I let them play with my camera. One of them broke one of my cameras, but it didn't matter, you know. The whole thing was to make the family honestly feel that you were a part of them, and that for you to honestly feel that you were a part of them. Because they know, a child knows, when you're there just to exploit them. And if you're there to exploit them, you're not going to get much. I don't care how powerful you are.
They took my word that I will not take pictures which they object. They trusted me. The teenagers trusted me. This is why I got along with them. Then they showed me the newer thing. They weren't afraid that I will criticize them and say it shouldn't be like that, or don't do that, or whatever, you know.
This is a young teenage suburbia. Kids sucking away at sodas, and the little girl in the background looking out of the corner of her eye at the boy that she's charming. I don't think Nina Lean was touched by anybody else in this particular get inside the minutiae of how people looked and behaved in all levels of American society.
There were sometimes people who were not aware of things, like in this, it says, I think it was a teenage girl story, or a teenage boy, no, a teenage girl, a teenage boy, teenage girl, a club, teenage, I already forgot, too many teenage. Now, I think teenage girl story, they were twins, boy and girl. And I was waiting for them to take pictures. And he said, she's on the phone. I went there, and there she was sitting. And there were not 1 minute where she kept her position the same. One foot went up, one down, one she changed the position. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Susie Q, truck on down, Big Apple!
The 50s, with the election of Eisenhower, became probably the most relaxed period that we've had since World War II, really. Eisenhower's intention was that we should try to settle down to some nice, quiet American pursuits and not rock the boat. And it was time for us to ease off a bit. And he accomplished that. The country was pretty quiet during the 50s.
There was an innocence, I think, about those days, a belief somehow that everything was basically somehow all right. This wonderful feeling of success, of having lived through this difficult war and won, and of getting back to real fundamentals, going ahead with your own life. And you can just see that, you can feel that all through the pages of life.
Let's go strolling through the park. There's a glory in my heart I never felt before. There's a girl at my side that I adore. There's a...
I would have chosen this picture for the magazine, and did. It was a story about a bunch of kids being initiated into a fraternity. And it says a great deal about the rather square, in modern terms, aspirations of boys going to college in the 1950s. They all have short haircuts. They're all dressed in tuxedos. They're all singing very earnestly. One kid is lighting a cigar. This says so much for the sort of straight arrow aspirations of post-war young America that I just can't believe that this picture wouldn't have a powerful impact on anybody who was interested in studying something about what was going on inside the skins of people at that time. We looked at the problem of photographing Middle America, or documenting Middle America, in a kind of a split vision, as best I can remember it. It was a foreign land to many of us, but nevertheless we were intensely interested in it. We were sympathetic to it, and respectful of it, and profoundly moved by it very often. What we tended to put down more were the pretensions of people. I remember, somewhat to my dismay now, doing a really hatchet job on the ladies' club in Washington, D.C. We laughed at them, but I don't think we would laugh at a hog farmer in Kansas.
I needed a picture of the whole family, and what fascinated me that the portraits behind are really the same faces. If you see the boys, the standing men, and the portraits in the back, they are the same faces. The ancestors look exactly like they. They knew what I'm taking. I never stole pictures, you know. I thought it's unfair. If they give us permission to take pictures, I thought it's unfair to do them in bad lighting or in something negative. If I took negative, I explained them why I needed the negative part. I mean, that not all in life is always roses.